Dune Awakening is set to get a massive change here, where it seems like they're completely overhauling the Deep Desert. Essentially, they're completely shifting game philosophies, where the creative director gives his full deep dive on what's happening with both PvP and PvE, as well as where the future of Dune Awakening is going. I'll break down all of that, then we'll also go over an overview and deep dive, as well as a whole bunch more. What's up, bros? Shopia here, back in with another video. Today we're checking out all things Dune Awakening. Alright, let's just jump into the message from the creative director. Again, this is on both the PvP, the PvE, and the future of Dune Awakening. He went on to say here with his opening statement that he wants to address the comments around the endgame for Dune Awakening, saying that they want to start by stating unequivocally they want PvE players to be able to play the endgame and have access to content of the endgame, as their goal is not to force PvE players to interact with a PvP system that may have no interest in. However, they do still believe the core concept of the Deep Desert is an endlessly renewing location that resets every week and creates an activity loop for great rewards. The tension heading out there, head on a swivel, eyes peeled for your foes as you enter the most dangerous parts of the most dangerous planet on the universe. They do still want players to embrace this loop and form guilds to work together. However, they have quite the massive change happening here with this major highlight, and they do say here in all bold, some areas of the Deep Desert will now be flagged as partial warfare, or essentially PvE. While the deepest parts of the Deep Desert, those will remain as they currently are with high rewards and high risk areas. They are going to allow players to explore testing stations and harvest T6 resources without any threat of conflict that they might not want. It is important to note that the top tier of the game is balanced around guilds and groups, so people will still find it grindy if they play solo. While I do mention that the land's red control points, shipwrecks, and the largest spice fields within this region will still remain PvP. The deepest parts of the Deep Desert will remain as they currently are. Now, they have highlighted this has been a main contention point for a lot of players. PvP itself has plenty of issues that need to be addressed, and they're taking steps in that direction with their first changes to the Scout Ornithopters. Now, they did address this in the AMA, and I also went over this in my last video. Essentially, Scout Ornithopters with rocket launchers attached will have their speed and maneuverability reduced. Rockets fired from them will also increase in heat generation. Thrusters will now provide a max speed bonus regardless of whatever wing you're using, ensuring that thrusters equipped scouts will be the fastest vehicles in the game. There was also a suggestion here with an infantry rocket launcher. Yes, now there will be a new T5 infantry rocket launcher, which will help improve the dynamics of the ground and vehicle combat. There are some additional changes to mechanics like respawn timers, vehicle storage tools, hand scanners, and other mechanics that they want to address that are being abused in the Deep Desert. They do mention that the philosophy around the Deep Desert and the intended dynamic there is that unless you really mess up, you'll always have the option to retreat in a good order. If you're smart and vigilant, you should never have to fight if you don't want to. And then if you run or call a halt to whatever task you are doing or pursuing, you should be able to make that choice, and PvP should happen when both parties decide when they want to fight over a location. And again, they reiterate that the Deep Desert becomes a place where people battle it out over specific objectives. Unburied testing stations, shipwrecks, resource-focused islands, and of course these spice blows. And they also do hit on that Thopters will always be incredibly important to crossing the desert, but that they shouldn't always be the dominant force in actual battles. They next up hit on here on the Landsrad, which of course is the system in the activity driver. They want that to promote conflicts between factions, internal politics between guilds, and the Landsrad should be doing that for everyone who wants to participate in the Elder game, where they do want players to engage in activities and earn votes of the various Landsrad houses. And the Landsrad itself is an umbrella for all endgame activities. Now, what form do those activities take? More dungeons with bosses that drop endgame loot. They're going to be adding more contracts that require specific tasks to be undertaken, more specialized delivery tasks that include components and cannot be stockpiled, and they do hit on the raid question. A lot of people do want raids added to the game. There will be a task on the Landsrad to actually complete those raids, and it is a framework that holds the endgame activities in place. They hit on that they're going to keep adding endgame activities and more PvE content, both free and paid content in the form of DLCs and expansions. And they of course do want to address some key flaws in the Landsrad design. Currently, stockpiling is rewarded, and that is not their intention for the system itself. They do want the Landsrad to reflect endgame tiers of progression, which includes vendors that can be unlocked for entire factions through participation, but they do still want to provide micro rewards for solo and small groups of players. Of course, they do mention they appreciate your feedback from the beginning of the long journey, and they of course do want to keep a clear and open communication. That actually does include the entirety of the message from the creative director. A bit of a short overview here so you get everything kind of encapsulated with it. For the Deep Desert, endgame changes, partial warfare, PvE has now been enabled in some areas. Players can now gather T6 resources without PvP being forced. PvP remains in the Deep Desert though, there'll still be a ton of PvP content, and weekly resets allow for flexible tuning and layout experiences. They are doing some PvP balance updates, starting with the Scout Ornithopter reducing its speed with rockets generate more heat, and thrusters give more max speed regardless of wings. We're getting that new T5 infantry rocket launcher, and there's going to be adjustments to respawn timers, vehicle storage, hand scanners, and abuse pro mechanics. They do still have their PvP philosophy here, which should be a choice, not a punishment. Smart players can retreat and avoid conflict, and PvP fights are intended for contested objectives only. They're also doing some Landsrad system overhauls, which is meant to drive faction conflict, give daily weekly rewards and goals. More varied PvE content is planned, potential future raids also as well, and there's several fixes incoming with stockpiling advantages being kind of removed, micro rewards, etc. Or last appear they do give their final words that they're going to be getting more free and paid PvE content on the way, that the devs are actively listening to the adjustments, and they do still want to hit on that Landsrad is the framework for all endgame content. I do have my thoughts here. I am super curious on what your guys' thoughts are. As a mostly solo player but now in a guild, I could say this endgame needs an entire rework itself. At least in my opinion, I really don't see this kind of being the end goal. I really hope they figure it out with the Deep Desert, but I really don't think it is it. Now, I'm not sure if they only added raids or PvE dungeons, that's the answer either. I know people might not like this take as much, but I do think that New World had a better philosophy when it came to this. I still think the 50v50 wars were a great concept, and I just don't see the open world PvP endgame being the answer. New World has something called races, where I do think is actually a better system. Those are dedicated for an hour where you do battle it out in PvP sections, and depending on who has the highest influence can declare wars on each other, and then within those factions those guilds can actually bid on the war. And I think unless they have dedicated events here or even pushing players to PvP for a specific reason, even on high populated servers the Deep Desert is just mostly kind of dead, and I think it's going to remain that way, especially now that you can just farm it via PvE. I don't think either of the answers here work. I really do think they need dedicated timers or at least dedicated scenarios where you can actually participate in events. It doesn't have to be 50v50 wars like New World or even the race content, and even though that game is dead, I do implore you to actually check that out, only in regards to it being the timed events there. Again, it doesn't have to be that content specifically, but I think if they want PvP to be the endgame overall, they need to have some sort of dedicated system and dedicated timer to events. Otherwise, this open world endgame in a few months, especially in a few weeks, is going to feel really dead. At least that's my take on it. We'll have to wait and see on all of it. But anytime they leave things open-ended here, or even offer a simpler solution like PvE areas, that's going to kind of destroy the whole point of the PvP section. Again, they 100% need both more PvP and PvE endgame. I don't think either direction right now is the answer though. I've had this discussion back and forth on Reddit. A lot of people are still in T3 and T4 gear, and I really do think once they hit T5 and T6, they're gonna have the same concerns that I do. Again, we'll have to wait and see. I want to know your thoughts on it overall though. We have a few more additional community posts here though. This first one though is that regardless that the endgame is a little bit stale at the moment, Dune Awakening has still reached over 1 million sales. And again, it's only on one platform right now, which is PC, and it is their fastest selling Funcom title. They have some other cool stats here, like there's been 500,000 ornithopters created, there's been 6 billion grams of spice consumed, and a few other notable stats here overall. Which leads us on to the next community post here, asking why is Funcom promoting PvP and their best work by far is PvE. I don't know if I agree with that totally. I think they still need to balance the two, but they 100% need way more PvE and way more PvP content as well. Hopefully we get that in the tune of raids or, like I said, PvP events. I get it's a sandbox game overall, and they really do got that part down, but once players hit T5 and T6, I just can't see them continuing with the gameplay loop as it is currently. We also have this post here kind of hitting on that systems haven't been fully done yet. As this person points out, nothing actually happens to you in the overland map when you run out of fuel or water. I always thought it was going to load you into your nearest section or make you even kind of fill it up, but for some reason here, no matter what you do in the overland map, even if you run out of fuel and water, it doesn't really do anything. Seems like this system was kind of put in the game and then never finished, which is starting to feel that way with a lot of the end game. Hopefully they do get around to this. It does seem like they do want to add additional things there though. Overall, should have covered for today's video. If you enjoyed it, like, subscribe, and until the next one. Deuces.